Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Moon Luna Vasquez. I am the co-chair of the Lesbian and Allies Project, a project of the U.S. Women in Cuba collaboration, and we work closely with WILFs, Cuba, and the, the Bolivarian Alliance Issues Committee. The U.S. Women in Cuba collaboration's mission is to build a strong U.S. women's movement dedicated to ending the U.S. government blockade against Cuba and to creating mutually beneficial U.S.-Cuba relations. Our work advances the rights of all women in the context of universal women's rights. WILF's Cuba and the Bolivarian Issues Committee works by empowering and educating diverse U.S. women to normalize relations between the U.S. and the countries that comprise of the Bolivarian Alliance through education, advocacy, and travel. The U.S. The Lesbian and Allies Project works to build alliances with Cuba's LGBTQIA2 spirit plus communities. We're committed to educating U.S. people regarding ways forward using the inspiration and example of Cuba's revolutionary work towards advancing all human rights. In 1995, over 40,000 women gathered in China to participate in the United Nations International Conference on Women to issue the Beijing Platform of Action. Today, as we celebrate the 30th anniversary of this historic moment that was crafted this program of women's equality in the context of human rights. We acknowledge the 12 critical areas of focus as shown in the video in the beginning. What was missing from those areas are two important issues: climate change and the topic that we're going to discuss today, the rights of LGBTQI2S people, plus people. We thought it'd be important to hold this webinar for two reasons. Over the last 30 years, there has been many advancements that recognize that LGBTQI2S plus rights are a women's issue and a human right issue. Secondly, we want to highlight the advancements of LGBTQI2S plus rights in Cuba, the country that the Lesbian and Allies Project and the U.S. Women in Cuba collaboration and WILF's Cuba and the Bolivarian Alliance Issue Committee focus on. It has been the task of the UN CSW's conversation circles, now the Rainbow Caucus, to organize us and to highlight the struggles of the LGBTQI2 Spirit Plus communities so that we see that this is one of the critical areas of the Beijing Platform for Action. We are honored to participate in that work and to highlight the work of our sisters in the FMC, the Federation of Cuban Women, and the NJC, the National Union of Cuban Jurists, in developing the Cuban's Constitution, which bases the rights of LGBTQI2 plus people in the context of human rights and love. In Cuba, love is law. Why LGBTQI2S plus? Why the Cuban Families Code? Why CSW? And why the Beijing Platform for Action? Right now, we're supposed to have Yamila, the woman who is one of the people that helped write the Families Code. But we're going to do a switch the program a little bit, and I'm going to turn the program over to Deb Golden, and she has 2 videos that she'll show. Deb, you're on. Thank you.
Thank you, Moon. So I'm a retired nurse practitioner, and I currently am on the advisory board for the U.S. Women in Cuba Collaboration, as well as the Lesbian Allies Project and the WILF Cuba and Bolivarian Alliance Committee. I also serve on some local health-related committees where I live in Seattle, Washington. So Dr. Yamila Gonzalez Ferrar hopefully is going to be joining us and discussing in more detail as an expert on somebody who was instrumental in helping to put together the Constitution, the Families Code of the Constitution in 2022. So just briefly, I'm not going to go into the detail, but some at that time, what the some of the LGBTQI rights that were granted were same-sex marriage, rights to anyone wanting to adopt or raise a child, and to non-commercial surrogate mothers, and for assisted reproduction. It protects trans rights. Although for many years, Cuba has treated sex reassignment surgeries as a health issue, and that's been available. Unfortunately, with the embargo now, it's very difficult for getting whatever supplies and medications are needed to do those surgeries. And also the new law designates LGBT discrimination as illegal. So I look forward to hearing in much more detail from an expert, from Dr. Yamila Gonzalez. So oh, and also in addition, I think Cubans should be very proud of the fact that the process that they use to implement this new families codes in 2022 was a process of participatory democracy, which is how they introduced and passed the referendum. I don't remember the number, but there were thousands of community meetings all across the country to discuss the issues before they made the final referendum. And I think it was about 2/3 of the country agreed to pass this referendum. So Cuba is definitely on the forefront of progressive human rights. So I recently had the privilege to visit Cuba once again, and it's really not easy to describe the mix of emotions while being there. Despite all the obstacles placed on Cubans due to the cruel blockade imposed by the US government against the Cuban people, the spirit of friendship, dedication, altruism still exists. And also, I love hearing all the best live music everywhere I go while I'm in Cuba. So I was able to conduct some interviews of Cuban women from the queer community to ask them about themselves and the community work they do, ask them if they think there's been any impact from the LGBTQI rights that began with the Families Code about 3 years ago, and what they think are some barriers to achieving full acceptance and equality for the LGBTQ plus community in Cuba. and what they and their organizations are doing to try to achieve that full equality for the queer community in Cuba. So I'd like to share with you two messages that I videotaped during my last visit this year in January and February. The first one is of Norma Guillard. Norma is a social psychologist, educator, publisher, advisor, and trailblazer who describes herself as an Afrofeminist. She's been a driving force on issues of gender identity and anti-racial discrimination in Cuba for many national and international organizations. In addition, Norma coordinates a group of lesbian women called REMI in Havana. And she helped develop other similar lesbian organizations in other provinces with whom she still maintains advisory ties. So, and the U.S. Women in Cuba collaboration has had the privilege of hosting her in the United States for speaking tours on 3 occasions over the years. We've learned a lot from her on these issues. And every time I see her, she tells me she needs to retire from retirement. But for those of us who know her, we know that's probably never going to happen. And then for those of you who were able to attend the collaboration CSW virtual event last Thursday, entitled Cuba, Model for Implementing the Beijing Platform for Action, you were fortunate to view the wonderful documentary Maestra by the filmmaker Catherine Murphy. Norma is one of the featured guests on the film, and she describes her experience as a 15-year-old teacher, a brigadista, during the 1961 Cuban literacy campaign, which she says started her on the path to social development, activism, and leadership. So with that, Amy, could you please show the video?
Soy Norma Rita Guillarli Monta, psicóloga social, investigadora, afrofeminista, activista antirracista, que a raíz del haber sido participante de la alfabetización en Cuba, siento que en ese momento casi comenzó mi activismo social. Desde esa enseñanza, en ese lugar que me ha convertido en una eterna alfabetizadora, pues me he dedicado por todos mis años a trabajo en la comunidad con diferentes enfoques. Al ser especialista en la comunicación, me he podido vincular con grupos diversos, defendiendo temas tabú como son la discriminación racial, la discriminación sexual, y en medio de esa defensa se ha posibilitado que trabaje en espacios comunitarios diversos, por haber sido la presidenta de la sección de identidades, haber sido, no ser parte de la sección la sección de identidades y diversidad que hoy llamamos seres en la Sociedad Cubana de Psicología. Y es desde ahí donde con activismo pude participar en el Centro Nacional de Prevención de VIH, apoyando con talleres y diferentes actividades, donde también hacía llegar la influencia de mis saberes con relación a la discriminación racial, con relación a la autoestima. Esto también posibilitó que lo pudiera hacer en el Centro Nacional de Educación Sexual, en su grupo de la Sociedad Multidisciplinaria de Estudio de la Sexualidad, donde pude apoyar también, siendo parte de las fundadoras del grupo de mujeres lesbianas, en ese momento del grupo de mujeres lesbianas en Cuba, que hoy ya es una red que disfruta de todas las ventajas que ha tenido el código de la familia, que le ha traído posibilidades de que sea concebido y reconocido el matrimonio, tanto el matrimonio por vía legal de casamiento como el matrimonio por una unión consexual, y que de ahí puedan producirse en el futuro posibilidades también de tener, eh, de tener eh, legalidad que la apoye a tal punto que si vamos a hablar de alguna limitación que ha habido al respecto, está más bien relacionada con el hecho de que a veces son las personas que operan la ley, que abogados o abogados que no son tan conocedores del tema, que hay que seguir trabajando en esa parte educativa para que no pongan trabas ni limitaciones, porque hemos tenido experiencias de casos que han ido y entonces le han dicho no, porque no está casado legal, no, y entonces también con la adopción e ir abriendo en ese sentido, como yo diría, las mentes con conocimiento y con educación. Son de las fundamentales limitaciones. He tenido posibilidades de hacer ese trabajo comunitario, sobre todo en esta etapa, porque paso a ser parte también de la directiva de la articulación afrofeminista cubana, y esa articulación ahora lo que ha hecho es hacer articularse con todos los grupos diferentes que existen con relación a estos temas, y sobre todo en esta última etapa haciendo énfasis de incorporar a esa articulación también a los grupos de mujeres lesbianas y bisexuales para poder tener cada día más personas conocedoras que trabajemos en un mismo sentido y con la fuerza que eso necesita para poder lograr los cambios sociales que estamos cada día buscando. Ser mujeres que juntas ayudemos a las transformaciones.
Thank you, Norma. So Norma also asked me to mention how important the role of Cuba's National Program Against Racism and Racial Discrimination and the Women's Advancement Program are in the goal to achieve full equality and acceptance of the LGBTQIA community in Cuba. So the next video is a short interview with a lesbian married couple from Havana, Argelia Hernandez and Ollantay Leon, who lead a community organization called Afro Diverso. So I had the opportunity to attend a drag show of extremely talented drag queens, and Argelia as a drag king with the groups with whom I was traveling this year and last year as well. Afro Diverso is described as an Afro LGBTQIA2S plus initiative of civil society of a collaborative and participatory nature with an anti-racist and Afro-feminist approach from three fundamental premises, including art, health, and community. The objective is to empower and make visible Afro LGBTQIA2 plus people. So I will briefly describe the premises. For art, it's focused on making visible, knowing, defending, and empowering Afro LGBTQI plus people through art of transformation as an artistic transport for community social transformation. We make handicrafts from recyclable materials for education and commercial use. For health, we promote holistic sexual health. We carry out actions to prevent STIs and other diseases. We promote spaces for healing and self-care. And for community, we carry out affirmative actions in neighborhoods with different themes and proposals that facilitates the construction of beneficial and healthy public policies. We provide accompaniment, shelter, counseling, and guidance to people in situations of violence. All of this anonymously based on our experience as popular educators and activists. And I was fortunate to experience firsthand some of the wonderful work they do, including soup kitchen every Sunday and working with children in their community. So go ahead, Amy, and show the video.
Soy Argelia Feyové Hernández, coordinadora general de un proyecto que se llama Afrodiverso, proyecto itinerante, afro-LGBTI, antirracista y afrofeminista. Soy drag king, soy uno de los primeros drag king en la historia de Cuba, sobre todo negro, y estoy muy orgullosa de llevar esta manifestación artística a la comunidad como empoderamiento de la comunidad afro-LGBTI.
Soy Antay León Chivas, coordinadora de Afrodiverso, esposa de Argelia Feyové, y también estoy muy orgullosa del trabajo que hacemos con el proyecto. Hemos tenido con este proyecto un impacto muy fuerte en la comunidad a raíz de los derechos LGBTI y desde que salió los cambios del Código de la Familia, esto ha logrado que tengamos un mayor reconocimiento social y que los beneficios a la comunidad LGBTI sean mucho más y más efectivos para todos, es decir, que nos ayuden a solucionar problemas y que nos apoyen en todo lo que hace falta en la comunidad LGBTI.
En la organización estamos todo el tiempo abogando por la defensa de los derechos LGTBI, de los derechos humanos, de los derechos de las personas, y hacemos un grupo de acciones comunitarias afirmativas que permiten el desarrollo intelectual, el desarrollo académico, el desarrollo de emprendimiento de cada persona que fluctúa por el proyecto con ganas de crecer y con ganas de seguir hacia adelante y tener un futuro promisorio y positivo.
Sí. También con nuestro proyecto logramos que haya un mayor reconocimiento social y intentamos incentivar la igualdad de todas las personas, que no haya diferencias y que sea todo que sea con mucho amor y con mucho cariño desde la comunidad LGBTI hacia la comunidad en general, y que este trabajo que hacemos logre que seamos todos una familia.
Bueno, y así vamos desarrollando este proyecto en el día a día.
Thank you, Argelia and Ollanta, for all the work you do to break down any barriers in your community and achieve full acceptance of the LGBTQI plus folks in your community. So in closing, I just want to say that our friends and the many women I have met and talked to about the blockade and the Families Code, they've shown gracious hospitality, amazing creativity, innovation, and resiliency in spite of the blockade. And they're truly forward-thinking and committed to independence, social justice, and peace. We share their dream to end the blockade in order that they and other women can be free to live to their fullest potential. So we have a lot of work to do. So stay tuned, because at the end of our presentation, we'll let you know how you can join in our movement to fight to end the US blockade and take Cuba off the list of state-sponsored terrorists. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Moon.
Thank you, Deb. Let me get my camera back on. Okay, here I am again. Okay, what amazing and inspiring work that they're doing in Cuba. Their commitment to the struggle. I'd like to thank also our sisters there. Thank you, Deb, for the work that you're doing. I'd also like to give the floor to Lenny. She's going to go back in and talk about more of the family code. She is sort of our in-house, okay, expert on the family code. Whenever we have a question within ourselves and want explanation and want stuff, This is the woman that we go to. Gracia Lenny, you're back on, sister.
Okay, I'm going to do an extremely abbreviated version of how we got here. So, at the time of the triumph of the Cuban Revolution, which was in 1960, discrimination against Black people and against women were correctly identified as wrong and were prohibited. And this took place in spite of, traditional prejudices in Cuban society, but it didn't happen with discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Both the traditional culture as well as the Catholic Church and maybe a little bit of influence from the Soviet Union, and created a sort of a machismo culture with a view of gay people as problems rather than people. But unlike some countries where we might be living, Cuba has consistently moved forward. By 1975, the Cuban Supreme Court was already saying that discrimination against people for being homosexual was illegal and that people discharged on that basis were entitled to reinstatement and compensation. By 93, Cuban people who were gay or trans were serving openly in the Cuban military. The 70s, Cuba created a constitution, which was a very advanced document for its time, but it had a view of the family as heteronormative, headed by a patriarchal male, etc. And so there was a point at which Cuba felt that they needed to create a new constitution, and they began to do that. The new constitution was finally formulated. It was passed by referendum in 1999, and then Cuba. The drafting process was huge. It involved public comment and revision, and oh golly, about 87%, a huge percentage of Cuban people voted yes. Those who had voted no were primarily driven by what they thought were permissions for same-sex marriage in the new constitution. And the original wording, which was very explicit, was changed after there was so much negative public comment, most of it driven by fundamentalist churches, if I can say. So they finally ended up with a version that said all people, all persons, have the right to establish a family. Marriage is a social and legal institution. It's one of the forms by which families can organize, founded in the free consent and equality of rights, obligations, and legal capacities of the two spouses. And not everybody in Cuba was happy about that. On the right, people thought it was too permissive of same-sex marriage and equity. And on the left, some people thought it was not explicit enough. But then Cuba went on to create a body of family law to conform to the new constitution. And it was remarkable. Código de las Familias, families code plural, a recognition of plurality. Families, not a single model. And it has over 400 articles. It not only protects the right of all people to form a family without discrimination and updates the legal definitions with inclusive models, it also addresses the right to a family life free from violence, centering values of affection, love, solidarity, and responsibility. Yeah, of course it recognizes same-sex marriage. Of course it makes, any discrimination against LGBTQ plus people, illegal. But it does some other very remarkable things. It gives agency to people previously considered sort of subjects, the elderly, children, people with disabilities. It focuses on horizontal rather than vertical relationships. autonomy is recognized for people who did not previously necessarily have legal autonomy. It brought children conceived with techniques of assisted reproduction within the law. It gave rights to the relationship between grandparents and their grandchildren. It placed a value on household and caregiving work, a formal value. And one of the most controversial aspects, well, let me tell you some of the controversial aspects. Of course, same-sex marriage was a controversial aspect. The concept that parents would not have absolute ownership rights over their children, a legal concept called patria potestad in Spanish, which derives from a Latin legal term meaning the power of the father, was eliminated, not eliminating parental rights, but focusing on parental responsibility. This was very controversial. The concept that children would have increasing responsibility within the family based on their developmental stage, so a certain developmental autonomy. That was very controversial. Surrogate pregnancy without any hope of gain, without any, no gifts or money can change hands. It has to be entirely done for affection among people who are connected, in some way. That was very controversial. The idea that family life should be free of violence was actually controversial. But not only were these consultations with the Cuban people, there were like 79,000 meetings. There were meetings everywhere. And so these were also educational processes. And when it came to the vote, which was September 22nd, I think, or 25th of 2022, about 75% of eligible voters participated. And of these, 67% voted yes for the Families Code. And yeah, so all this also means about 33% of people voted no. So makes some things real obvious. It was a real vote. Not everybody gets it. And those who don't, they can talk all they want, but now it's law. They are not free to discriminate against LGBTQI plus people or anybody else they disapprove of. And the process is so remarkable. The decisive yes vote just points up that revolutionary Cuba, a country under siege by the US from its very first moments, country that the US is just trying to strangle by every possible means, has an overwhelming majority of people who still believe in justice and equality and human solidarity. They continue to make progress in the face of all these difficulties, and they do this based on open discussion, a democratic process that's sometimes painful and sometimes difficult, and they're reaching toward a better world. And it's exactly the power of the good example that I think that the US finds so frightening and is trying so hard to eliminate. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lenny. Boy, it was good to hear all that information for me once again, and stuff. And we just got word that Yamila is in a formal session at the UN. The Cuban delegation comes here during the 2 weeks of the UNCSW, and their main mission here is to attend the meetings at the UN, give reports, listen to what's happening. So there is where Yamila is. We'll try and sit her next year on a panel. It may still happen again that she's in the UN, taking care of business in Cuba and about Cuba. And we're here at the same time. taking care of the business and the work that we're doing in solidarity with Cuba, learning from them and marching on. I forgot to announce my pronouns. It's she and her, okay? We're now going to move on from the family's code of this portion of the session also into the two other speakers that we have. Amy, they are from Denver. I'm going to turn it over to Amy right now. Thanks, Amy.
Hey, Moon. My name is Amy Bryant, pronouns they, them. I am the Vice Chair for the Executive Council of the United Nations Association of the United States, and also the Cultural Director for the Gay Games Denver Bid Committee. If you don't know what Gay Games is, please message me after this. I'd love to tell you about it. But I am here to talk about the Cuba Code and how it relates to my work for local, national, and international LGBTQ activism that I do. So with the family code, I didn't know anything about it until the Lesbians and Allies Project graciously invited me to speak. I delved into it and began to realize the possibilities of this being replicated on local, national, and international levels to promote equity among LGBTQIA2 spirit plus persons and just marginalized, under-resourced persons in general. So one of the things that stands out to me about this code is that it really addresses intersectional issues and identities. And, you know, with family law, reproductive rights, domestic violence protections, children's rights, maternity and paternity rights, protections for persons who are older and persons with disabilities. I think that this provides a really comprehensive, holistic framework, and it intersects a lot with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So with this, the definition of marriage in this code is defined as a union between two people, which I really like. It doesn't really mention same-sex relationships. It does, but in the context of, you know, having same-sex relationships, it also kind of breaks down gender into binaries. So I liked the gender expansive language that they used. So this frees the social institution of marriage from compulsory heterosexuality is, I believe, one of the terms that they used in this code. And I found that to be very, I thought it was a great way to put it. And I'm gonna start using compulsory heterosexuality in my work going forward. So with this, in the United States, the Supreme Court of the United States, in particular, Clarence Thomas has mentioned his desire to repeal same-sex marriage in the United States. So one way to counter this is that we could replicate this for on the state level. You know, the state that I am in, Colorado, we're great for LGBTQI protections. So we actually codified same-sex marriage into our state constitution, which other states and states around the world could replicate. It's a really good, more localized strategy to protect marriage rights. And that way, if something on the federal level happens, folks on the state level will at least be covered. So one of the issues that was mentioned before was pushback by far-right neoconservatives and also religious interference which we're seeing a lot more in the United States and around the world. Unfortunately, there's the rise of autocratic governments, fascist governments, organizations in civil society who also have ties to conservative religious groups like the Heritage Foundation, their Project 2025, and then CFAM. So what these organizations seek to do basically is establish a theocracy in the place of democracy. So we can see this trend happening all over the world. Unfortunately, and it also intersects with places that have been heavily colonized by the Western world. So with this law, with this code, it's worth mentioning that there was some pushback by religious organizations, but it was able to pass with public support, with participatory democracy. So with the rise of autocratic governments, fascism, far-right governments, it's really important to keep in mind that democracy is extremely important and it must be preserved. So we're seeing a lot of rise of talk about gender ideology, neonatalism, and then also one of the terms that is kind of bandied about is natural families. So with this CUBA code, it tackles that issue of only natural families having rights. Natural families is basically rhetoric. It's anti-IVF, alternative fertilization methods, anti-LGBTQ+ families, even going as far as, having step parents. Anything outside of the heteronormative nuclear family, this rhetoric is on the rise. So with this code, it prohibits discrimination based on identity and sexual orientation, and then it protects family ties, and it's not based on blood relations. So we're seeing folks who have, welcomed children in by adoption being able to have protections, and it grants multi-parental rights. So in this way, this code recognizes the diversity of families as they exist in the real world. And so with this pushback that we're seeing and with this pushback that we saw with this code, it just really illustrates the power and the importance of the political will being there. And one of the most direct ways to influence political will is by changing public attitudes, namely stereotypes, negative attitudes, and perceptions towards LGBTQ folks. So with education, that was mentioned earlier as being very important to be able to sway opinions and also get the support needed to pass these laws, legislation, just as this. The power of storytelling is huge. So with CSW, I was able to connect with the UN ambassador to Malta. Malta has great LGBTQI protections. However, they also experienced some political pushback when they were trying to advance LGBTQ rights. So that's when the power of storytelling happened. So Malta is a fairly small country. So the storytelling became a bit more personalized, more personal. So there was this story that this ambassador said, one of the things that changed public attitudes the most was having a gay couple adopt a child with disabilities. And this child was considered unadoptable by a lot of folks. And this couple did not have any reservations at all. They adopted this child, gave them a loving, supportive family, and that really showed people what a family could look like and what a family should look like. Unconditional love, unconditional support, and radical acceptance. So when public attitudes change, then the political will follows through activism. One of the other issues that Malta had, and a lot of countries have nowadays, with a variety of things that are anti-rights, is misinformation and disinformation, lies being spread online, unfortunately. So stochastic terrorism is on the rise. So with that, there's a lot of rhetoric that's anti-LGBTQ, a lot of misinformation, disinformation that needs to be countered. So one of the ways to do this is to start holding tech companies accountable for what's on their platforms. And one of the interesting things about the conversation with Malta is that they were working on financial penalties for these tech companies in the form of taxes. So with instances of spreading misinformation, disinformation, discrimination, hate speech online, there will be financial penalties for that, which is usually what gets companies and corporations' attention. And then there's also something that the UN is working on. It's called the United Nations Code of Conduct for Information Integrity on Digital Platforms. So I encourage you all to look that up. It's basically to promote facts, expose conspiracy theories and lies, while also safeguarding freedom of expression and information. And for my closing remarks, I really would love to start seeing more work with coalitions. So as I mentioned earlier, and as folks earlier in this webinar mentioned, there's a lot of intersectional issues when it comes to LGBTQ rights and the family code. So I would encourage folks to get creative with coalitions, because I think that we're working on the same or similar things, but we're too siloed off. And so our responses are lesser than they could be and a little bit fractured. So I would like to encourage folks to, dream big, start to find other organizations or movements that intersect with your agenda. They don't actually have to align specifically with that. But yeah, people power is the name of the game. And yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Amy. We are a little bit behind schedule. There's where my head was at just when I took that minute to breathe. One of the things that I want to mention, because I want to give credit to the CSW Rainbow Caucus, is that our friendship with Amy and the relationship that we have built is a direct result of the Rainbow Caucus at CSW, okay? Now we're going to move on to nuestra compañera Leah Burbano Mosquera, and she is associated with Mujer en Mujer, and she is here from Ecuador. Chévere, muchacha, adelante.
Okay. Gracias. But I'm going to read my presentation in English. Greetings from Guayaquil, Ecuador. I am Lia Burbano, lesbian, feminist, educator, activist, human rights defender, founder and current director of Fundación Mujer y Mujer, a civil society organization that has been working to promote and defend human rights of women and LGBTIQ plus people in Ecuador for 22 years. For me, it is a real honor to be part of this important panel and to be present at CSW. So thank you, Moon, for the invitation. Just two little things before I start. One, English is not my native language, so I apologize in advance for any mispronounced words. And two, although it may not seem like it, I am quite ill, but I do my best to make my message clear. That's it. Let's get started. First, my premise is that Family Code of Cuba represents a progressive model in family diversity. So during my presentation, I will reflect on the full recognition of diverse families based on our own experience as an LBQ plus organization and the lessons learned from the Cuba model, emphasizing the challenges and opportunities that Ecuador would face in case it approaches this model. Having said this, the first thing I should mention is that in Ecuador, LGBTI rights have advanced and are warranted in the political constitution of the Republic, although some legal barriers persist, such as excuse me, the PowerPoint, if it's possible to move on. Next, please. Next, next, and next, and next. Okay. As I said, our rights, our LGBTIQ plus rights in Ecuador have warranty in our constitution, although some legal barriers persist, such as lack of recognition of diverse families, the exclusion of diverse families in the childhood and adolescence code, the absence of a comprehensive law against discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender expression and identity and sexual characteristics, the existence of practices or misnamed therapies of sexual conversion, limitations in access to inclusive health care and education. And also, next please, and also certain social barriers such as discrimination and violence based on gender and sexual orientation, gender expressions, and gender identity, religious prejudice and conservatism, rejection in the workplace, underrepresentation in the political sphere and the media, disinformation, and resistance to change. Next, please. Next one, sorry. Faced with this panorama and taking the Cuban Family Code as a reference, from Mujer y Mujer, my organization, we have asked ourselves a question: what improvements should be implemented to promote more LGBTQ plus rights in Ecuador? And these are our conclusions. First, to legally recognize diverse families and multiparentally. Cuba's Family Code establishes a broad and flexible concept of family, defining it beyond the traditional nuclear structure. This allows for the legal recognition of families composed of same-sex couples, extended families, reconstituted families, and multi-parental models. In contrast, in Ecuador, although the Constitution protects the rights to family, the Code for Children and Adolescents follows a more traditionalist approach, limiting the notion of family to the mother-father-children relationship. This has implications for the recognition of same-parent families, which do not yet have legal backing in the country. In this sense, from A Mujer Mujer, we propose ensure that families formed by same-sex couples, single-parent families, extended families, and other configurations are recognized the same rights as heteronormative families. Include multiparenting in the legal framework, allowing more than two people to be recognized as parents, ensuring rights of filiation, inheritance, and social security for sons and daughters in these families. 2, equal marriage and adoption, emphasizing and legalized adoption by same-sex couples. The Cuban Code is progressive in this regard, allowing for equal marriage and adoption by same-sex couples. In Ecuador, although the Constitutional Court legalized equal marriage in 2019, the Children's Code has not been updated to reflect these changes, meaning that same-sex couples are still unable to legally adopt. In this context, we propose modify adoption law to remove any barriers that prevent same-sex couples from adopting on equal terms with heterosexual couples. Implement sensitization and training campaigns for officials of adoption institutions, warranting processes free of discrimination and heteronormative biases, and to guarantee that children's rights take precedence over prejudices and conservative beliefs, ensuring their well-being in diverse families. I think there is a problem with the PowerPoint because I am moving 2 or 3 maybe. Okay, next one. Next one. Okay. Filiation and multiparenting. Explicitly include protection against discrimination in the Children's Code. So one of the most important advances in Cuba is the recognition of multi-parenting. That is the possibility for a child to legally have more than 2 parental figures. This is crucial for families in which there is a biological parent and a same-sex couples, allowing co-responsibility in parenting without excluding any of the caregivers. In Ecuador, the model is still binary, recognizing only 2 parental figures, mother and father. This generates problems in cases of homoparental families where one of the parents is not legally recognized. Therefore, we propose the following you can see on the screen. Reform the Childhood and Adolescence Code to include explicit protection against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identities in all areas: home, education, health, and child protection system. Establish a flexible reporting mechanism for LGBTIQ+ children and adolescents who face violence or discrimination in their families, educational centers, or other institutions. Train justice operators, teachers, and child protection services personnel in LGBTIQ+ rights, ensuring an effective response without revictimization. Next, please. Focus on parenting and education, specifically promoting sexual and family diversity education. The Cuban Code promotes an upbringing free of prejudice and recognizes the right of children to be educated in an environment of respect for diversity. In Ecuador, sexual and family diversity education is a highly politicized issue. Although the Constitutional Court has demanded the implementation of sexual and reproductive rights education, there is still resistance from conservative sectors, which affect the guarantee of inclusive education for LGBTIQ+ children. In this regard, we propose the following. You can see it. Include in the educational curriculum content of sexual diversity, gender identity, and diverse family models based on scientific evidence and human rights approaches. implement training and awareness programs for teachers, administrative personnel, and families, promoting educational environment free of discrimination. And of course, ensure the educational materials reflect the reality of diverse families and the rights of LGBTQ plus people to foster respect and inclusion from childhood. Next, please. In this sense, as I mentioned, at different times, although in Ecuador we have a constitution that guarantees rights, there are still some challenges that require priority attention. For example, resistance from conservative and religious sectors. In many countries, and Ecuador is not a section, conservative groups and some religious leaders have historically opposed advances in LGBTIQ plus rights, arguing that they undermine traditional values or the natural family. These sectors exert a strong influence on public opinion and politics, promoting discourses of disinformation and campaigns against inclusive reforms. They have promoted legislative and judicial blockades to prevent the expansion of rights, resorted to strategies such as media pressure and lobbying with political actors. Next, please. Another challenge is lack of political will to reform the childhood code. Excuse me. Although there has been advances in the recognition of LGBTIQ plus rights in Ecuador, many reforms remain still due to a lack of a state commitment. Political resistance is due in part to electoral calculation, as certain parties fear losing support from conservative sector if they push for progressive reform. There is no consensus within the National Assembly and no clear agenda for reforming the Children's Code, which delays the inclusion of explicit protection against discrimination. Next one, next please. Challenges in the implementation and application of new regulations, another challenge. Even when legislative advances are achieved, their application faces obstacles such as the lack of training of public officials, judges, and justice operators in LGBTQ plus rights. The existence of progressive norms does not guarantee their effective enforcement if there are no monitoring and sanction mechanisms for those who do not comply with them. It is necessary to ensure resources and institutionally will to implement public policies that support legal reforms, avoiding that they remain only on paper. Next one, please. The last chance we have is the need of strength, social and political mobilization. The struggle for equal rights requires an active civil society to maintain pressure on institutions and decision makers. Awareness campaigns and advocacy strategies are needed to counteract the disinformation promoted by opposing sectors. The articulation between LGBTI plus collective, human rights organizations, and allied political actors is key to push for reforms and ensure their effective implementation. Next, please. At this point, I would like to highlight the challenges and opportunities that we believe should be considered in order to achieve the full exercise of rights, both in Cuba and Ecuador. For Cuba, for example, we recommend ensure the effective implementation of the code and prevent obstacles to its application by conservative sectors, and ensure that legal protection translates into real cultural change within families and society. For Ecuador, we are recommending reform the childhood and adolescence code to reflect advances in LGBTIQ plus rights and guarantee adoption for same-sex couples, expand protection against discrimination, and ensure that LGBTIQ plus children has adequate protection frameworks. And finally, include family diversity in educational policies to promote respect and inclusion for childhood. The Cuban model demonstrates that it's possible to guarantee the recognition and legal protection of diverse families, offering a reference for other countries in the region. Although Ecuador faces resistance and obstacles, it also has opportunities to strengthen LGBTIQ+ rights through legal reforms and social mobilization. The articulation with networks such as Lesbian and Allies is fundamental to promote structural changes, promote the recognition of rights, and consolidate progress in the region. In this context, and by way of conclusion, I would like to emphasize the following points. Cuba has made significant progress in terms of recognition of family diversity and LGBTIQ+ rights, while Ecuador still maintains a legal framework that excludes diverse families. So we have to work hard to make more advances. The recognition of equal marriage and adoption in Cuba represents a progressive model for Latin America, while in Ecuador, same-sex couples still face legal barriers to adoption and filiation. Protection against discrimination within the family is stronger in Cuba, while in Ecuador, there are general constitutional protections, but without a specific focus in the children's code. Multi-parenting in Cuba represents an innovative advance, allowing more than two people to be legally recognized as parents, something that has not yet been discussed in Ecuador. Let's build together more just, equitable, and inclusive societies where all families can be recognized and protected equally. Thank you very much.